Now, the question that begs to be answered in today's short study is, what should we do against the modern variation of the Scandinavian, which has potential to lead to the Portuguese Gambit? What I want you guys to do is to forget about pawn to d4, because definitely black is going to play bishop g4 and they know their stuff very well. You see, the Scandinavian defense is not even white's worst nightmare. Trust me with all your necks. Guys, if there is one dangerous opening that arises from the Scandinavian, which I would say is the Portuguese Gambit, where black develops the king's knight first before taking on d5. Now, this is not yet the Portuguese Gambit, it's the modern variation of the Scandinavian. The Portuguese Gambit occurs when white plays pawn to d4, the main line, and then black plays bishop g4, developing the light squared bishop first before closing the center by playing pawn to e6 later on. Now wait, why did I say the Scandinavian defense is not even that dangerous? I believe there are so many refutational lines, so many things that you can do against the normal Scandinavian defense. For example, the Leonard Gambit, which I covered in my yesterday's video. By the way, you can visit my channel and watch that video. What should we do against the modern variation, which has potential to lead to the Portuguese Gambit? So my anti-Portuguese Gambit begins with knight c3, as if it's the Vanjit opening. By the way, this is also very much playable even at the top level. You can check the master's database. All you want is for black to take the d5 pawn with his knight, which is the top played move. By the way, you can see knight takes d5 in the master's database and also in the Leech's database. Over 6 million people take back with the knight. And now from here, just know that you are playing the reverse scotch with a tempo. How is this like the scotch? So this is where we play bishop c4, double attacking this knight. And once black takes your knight, you don't recapture on c3. But first of all, go queen f3, intending to give a check on f7 before taking that knight. So they play pawn to e6, and this is when you take back. Question: how does this resemble the scotch? You heard me saying that. I can explain. Remember, the scotch is where white starts with e4, then you play e5. After knight f3, you play knight c6. And after pawn to d4, you take. Then if white recaptures, you don't take back immediately. You first of all play bishop c5. So that if white takes your knight on c6, this is when you go queen f6. Intending to checkmate them on f2. Suppose they play something like knight a5 or knight c3 or even bishop c4. They don't do that. They mostly play queen d2, after which you now take back like this. So if I go back to our anti-Portuguese Gambit, you can see the similarity already. The only difference is black's pawn is not on e5, the way it appears in the Scotch game. So this is what is happening here. When you reach this position and black plays knight c6, intending to go knight e5 maybe, just play queen g3 to slow down their kingside development. Then continue playing whatever you want to do with your life. If black plays bishop d6, you can't play queen g3, but at least you can go knight h3 and knight g5, and after pawn to h6, you sacrifice your knight for a quick mate by playing h4. If bishop e7, a more solid move, you begin with h4 followed by knight h3, sacrificing your pawn, which doesn't work well for black. Once you master these lines, you will never lose to the Portuguese Gambit that arises from the Scandinavian ever again. In the Leech's database, the top played move is knight c6. Considering black may play knight e5, I find queen g3 to be a tactical move. What are you doing with this queen here? Well, you're just stopping black from castling short early and also stopping them from developing their dark squared bishop. Cause if they just go ahead and play bishop d6, their g7 pawn falls with tempo. And I swear this is going to happen many times in your blitz games and rapid games. You see, the other purpose of playing queen g3 is to stop knight e5. So this is what I highly recommend you should do against knight c6 instead of playing boring chess. So at this point, your opponent will play something like pawn to g6 so that they can develop their dark squared bishop in harmony. But this is when you can go bishop d2 just like I said, so that after bishop g7, you castle long and start pawn storming right away. If bishop d6 attacking your queen, here you can even play pawn to f4, knowing you're going to castle long. And I just find this to be very flexible as compared to the normal lines of the Portuguese Gambit. After queen g3, if black asks for a queen trade, don't give them. Be stingy. Yes, you can play bishop f4, but I just don't see a better continuation after pawn to e5. So the move to consider is pawn to f4 once again. This time if pawn to e5, you have knight f3 reinforcing you want to take. If they play pawn to e4, you have knight g5, and they have so many weaknesses to worry about. If they take on f4 with their pawn, this is when you recapture with your bishop. Luckily, there's no pawn to e5. If queen e7 check, you can even defend with your knight, and it looks like black has pawn to f6, but thanks to our light squared bishop, that comes with tempo, cause we can now castle long to unpin our knight magically, and maybe on the next move win black's queen like this. So what am I saying? In the queen g3 line, if black plays queen d6 or bishop d6, just remember to play f4 and continue doing your stuff. The key is quick development in these kinds of lines. Anyway, after knight c3, knight takes, bishop c4, knight takes, queen f3, e6, and pawn takes, the move that you're going to see in over the board games instead of knight c6 is bishop d6, which is the top played move in the Masters database, by the way. It's just fast, and this is when you can easily go knight h3, the move that I talked about earlier. I find this to be faster than knight e2, and here is why. If black castles short, I just want to play knight g5, attacking nothing, and maybe provoking the move pawn to h6 in some way, which is the top played move in the Lichess database, as you can see. Once this is played, I don't want to retreat my knight. I want to play pawn to h4, betting black to take my knight, which most of your opponents would do, by the way, because it's not just clear what you're doing, but if this happens, the game is over or almost over. You just want to make your opponent. Let me give you an example. Say black plays knight c6, a wasted move. Now you can easily go queen h5. If pawn to f6, you go pawn to g6, and there is no escaping. Checkmate. So this is our plan here. Pawn to e5 has also been tried, but once again you can just go queen h5 and on the next move mate black. So this line doesn't help either. Maybe black should play rook e8, but again queen h5 is a problem because you want to mate them. If pawn to f6, you have g6 and then mate in 2. If king f8, again you have pawn to g6. If f6, you're going to mate them in 2, just like we saw. So the best black can do is to play queen f6, allowing you to develop your dark squared bishop with tempo. And after f takes g6, you give a check. If king f7, you grab the queen and then walk away with a piece. Black can't even take due to rook takes c8. Bingo! So once again, this is what you do to avoid Gotham's Portuguese Gambit. You just go knight c3, allowing them to take on d5 so that you develop your light squared bishop. But see, after knight takes, queen f3, e6, and pawn takes, the truth of the matter is you're not going to see many traps happening, but at least you are going to be so comfortable and have nothing to worry about. You're just playing an equal game. You will develop your pieces very fast and castle long. So once again, in the bishop d6 line, knight h3 seems to be a great initiative, and whatever black does, you just go knight g5. Like in the knight c6 line, you still go knight g5, and if knight e5, you go queen h5. Black can't take because of checkmate. And if pawn to g6, by the way, you have queen e2 so that you can recapture on c4 with your queen and start laughing at these weaknesses. If pawn to h6, you just play bishop b3, knowing black can't take because they're going to lose their rook. On the next move, this is how the game may continue, and what you achieved in this line was to create a lot of weaknesses so that you can be way ahead in development and then castle long. So once again, in the knight c6 line, you still go knight g5, and if knight e5, you go queen h5. If castle short, you have moves like queen e4, provoking all sorts of weaknesses on this side of the board. For example, if pawn to g3, you have queen h4, and after pawn to h5, you have pawn to g4. These are the things that I'm talking about, you guys. It's hardly easy for black to defend. And before I end this video, let's look at this bishop e7 line. There are all sorts of things you can do. Queen g3 is okay, knight h3 is okay, bishop d2 is also fine. But knowing that black wants to castle short, what I like doing is start pawn storming on the king side as fast as I can. By the way, if bishop takes, now I know black is not going to castle short because of my rook, and I can play queen e4 here, double attacking the dark squared bishop, So black has to play something like bishop f6. And then I completely mess up the king side to disturb black's plans. Look at this. So I'm just one move away from castling long and bring all my pieces in harmony. After pawn to h4, if black doesn't take and say they just go ahead and castle short, well, I have all sorts of moves that I can play if I want to, but playing strategically means making moves like these. Again, forcing black to take because my rook is still on h1, right? So there's going to be some trouble there. For example, if bishop takes, here I can even play queen h5. If pawn to g6, I go queen h6. And there are so many questions that black needs to answer. I want to mate, and I'm also going to win the bishop. Oh, there's queen takes f2 check, but here I can just play king d1, and after rook d8 check, I have bishop d3, and now black is just going to lose the bishop. So that's why even after castle short, I find this pawn to h4 move to be very useful so that I can prepare for this knight maneuver. So in the bishop e7 line, pawn to h4 and knight h3 is a very great initiative. You should remember this line. If black doesn't take and say they play knight c6, intending to go knight e5 next, well, once again, I can just go knight g5. That's the idea, so that if bishop takes, they can now allow me to open up my h-file. And even after pawn to g6, I have all sorts of moves like queen h3, bishop d2, castle long, or even bishop e3 like in this particular position because I want to play this move. If bishop d7, I easily castle long. If pawn to e5, I have bishop c5 and queen f6. If knight e5 anyways, I have queen h3, and say after pawn to h5, I simply retreat my light squared bishop and prepare for pawn to g4 next. Even rook d1, for example, after king g7, pop, attacking the queen, and after queen e7, I play bishop d4, pinning the knight. Not all your opponents are going to take. After bishop c4, some people prefer closing the position with pawn to e6, pawn to c6, or even knight b6, the top played move in the master's database. Here you can just retreat your bishop. After knight c6, you go queen f3, wanting to capture on f7. If pawn to e6, knight ge2 is playable. But the move, once again, that I like to slow down black's kingside development is queen g3, because black is not going to develop the dark squared bishop. If queen d6, once again, I can still go pawn to f4, I think. This is okay. If knight d5, I have pawn to d3, just playing active chess, you know. Again, if black doesn't take or play knight b6, they might try pawn to c6 in this position, which I believe Levy likes. But again, you can go queen f3. So that worse off, if black takes now, you can easily take on f7 before taking the knight. But Levy is not going to do that. Most solid players like playing pawn to e6. Look at this. You can do whatever you want, like pawn to d4 or knight ge2 first, or even knight h3 in this particular position. The key is not just to take on d5. But you see, instead of playing any of the highlighted moves, again, the move I like is queen g3. It just slows down black's kingside development and gives me more time to develop my pieces on their most potential squares. If queen d6, by the way, knight f3 is a move, pawn to d4 is a move, even knight ge2. But if you don't want to exchange queens, you can also try queen g4. If black plays e5, you're going to take the bishop. And if they play pawn to h5 to harass your queen, now you prove a point with queen e2. At least you created this one weakness. That's the difference. And by the time black will develop all his pieces, you will be way ahead in development. Say bishop d7, knight e4, queen c7, knight f3, castle long, c4, knight f4, bishop takes, queen takes, g3, queen h6, knight ge5, pop, bishop e8, c5, knight d5, h4, stopping h5, f6, knight c4, king b8, and knight ed6. So there are so many things that you can do at the end of the day when you master this anti-Portuguese gambit. So in conclusion, when you reach this position and black plays knight c6, intending to go knight e5 maybe, just play queen g3 to slow down their kingside development. Then continue playing whatever you want to do with your life. If black plays bishop d6, you can't play queen g3, but at least you can go knight h3 and knight g5, and after pawn to h6, you sacrifice your knight for a quick mate by playing h4. If bishop e7, a more solid move, move, you begin with h4 followed by knight h3, sacrificing your pawn, which doesn't work well for black. Once you master these lines, you will never lose to the Portuguese Gambit that arises from the Scandinavian ever again. Now, time for you to go and check out my new e5 defense course, which I have also linked in the comment section down below. And I'm glad to say, so far it has received a lot of attention and people are getting it like crazy. So it's an opening response that you try against White's e4 opening. You're going to learn how to play against the Scotch, the Ruy Lopez, the Bishop's opening, 3 Knights opening, the 4 Knights game, the Vienna game, even the Italian game. So it's the complete e5 defense course that I just launched with my team. You better go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.